beer, it's good for you.
Hello and welcome to the video. Within this video I'm sharing a new tried and tested recipe for a flavourful yet low calorie 3.4% ABV IPA that you can easily brew at home with basic all grain equipment. This beer is packed with tropical citrus goodness without the extra calories, carbs or alcohol. Along with sharing the recipe, I'm also sharing my methods and plenty of hints and tips from the A to Z of the process, and we'll finish up with a look at the resulting beer along with my tasting notes. So let's get started. Low-calorie beers are becoming super popular because they deliver great flavour without the weight gain guilt or too much alcohol. The challenge with low-calorie IPAs is balancing big hop flavours with lighter bodies and lower alcohol content, of course, but with the right ingredients and methods it works really well. This recipe that is being shared as part of this video guide offers just 82 calories and 3.85 grams of carbs, for a 12 ounce or 355 milliliter serving. In contrast, a standard IPA of 6.5% ABV to the same volume will give you about 200 calories and naturally a higher level of carbs too, likely in the range of between 13 to 22 grams. This recipe offers an estimated reduction in calories of 59% and up to 82.5% reduction in carbs, as well as a reduction in ABV of over 3%, making this beer something that you can really enjoy without the same negatives that come with a stronger, more calorie and carb rich version. Let's now take a look at this recipe's vital statistics. As you can see, the recipe offers an approximate ABV of 3.4%, making it an easy session beer. The BU-GU ratio, shown almost at the bottom, shows the relationship between bitterness and alcohol at 0.93, giving this one the required bitterness bite that really makes an American IPA sing. Adding further to the bite, we have a final gravity of 1000 neutral, meaning that this one finishes dry, which is great for cleansing your palate, which means this beer will pair great with a whole range of different food. The recipe for this beer can be found in full within the video's description, which is underneath the video window when viewed on a desktop computer. You will also find a link there to the full recipe on Brewfather, which can be used free of charge with some restrictions. I suggest that you fully convert the recipe before ordering in your ingredients so that you're actually brewing the recipe as intended. I also strongly suggest that you brew this recipe as is the very first time, resisting the temptation to tweak it, as tweaks are already in place to bring this recipe into a very good shape. I have an easy guide to recipe conversion using Brewfather on my channel as shown on screen now. Within this video, this recipe is being brewed using a Brewzilla Gen 4 65-liter brewing system to the volume of 10 litres or 2.64 US liquid gallons, but as part of the conversion process this can be scaled and shaped to suit your brewing system and volume requirements. Shown on screen is the water profile that I recommend for using with this recipe. IPAs love a chloride to sulfite ratio that leans slightly towards sulfites to accentuate hop bitterness and dryness. So this hoppy profile completes this recipe. Using the right water profile is very important. After all, beer is mostly water and its balance is vital, so that it suits the beer that you are brewing. Naturally, this water profile is just one way to go here. If you have a different profile that you really enjoy with this beer style, then go with that. But just bear in mind that this recipe was written with this profile in mind and has been tweaked according to the results obtained using this profile. Let's now move on to the brew itself, which starts by preheating your mash water to the first mash test temperature and then adding in your grain, which needs to then be stirred into the mash water, ensuring that you have no grain clumps and that every grain is wet. To do this you can use a mash paddle or a whisk if you wish, but personally I use a drill attachment because this makes the process much faster and easier with a very high effectiveness compared to manually stirring, unless you're going to use 5 times the amount of time. Falling short on this part of the brew is very unwise, as it will likely impact the rest of your brew very negatively in terms of efficiency and in the end the beer's final ABV. On screen you can now see the mash schedule for this one. By mashing in at this mid-range temperature both beta amylase, which produces more fermentable sugars, and alpha amylase, which creates less fermentable dextrinous sugars, are now active. The result to this is a balanced beer with good fermentability and moderate body. It produces a crisper, drier beer with a decent alcohol yield, making it a common choice for many styles. Let's now start the mash and go through the grain bill with an explanation of my choices here. First of all, as our base malt we're using Pilsner malt. It's light in colour, clean in flavour and provides just enough fermentable sugar to get us to our target alcohol content. Plus, it keeps the calorie count down while still giving us a solid base for our IPA, which is naturally going to be mostly flavoured with our hops. To add in some much needed body and mouthfeel along with head retention, we're adding a small amount of carapils, which is a specialty malt. This malt does this without adding any significant colour or flavour. This malt is very good for maintaining balance in high attenuated low ABV beers like this one, to prevent the beer from feeling too thin. Then lastly, flaked barley is another key ingredient and is classed as an adjunct. Flaked barley adds in protein and beta-glucans, which increase the perceived body and creaminess of this beer. The extra protein also helps form and sustain a thicker, longer-lasting head. Furthermore, it helps create a fuller, silkier mouthfeel, which works very well for a low ABV calorie beer, to avoid it feeling too thin once again. Next up came the sparge. For sure, I highly recommend that you sparge in general, but I recommend it more than usual for beers like this one, where malt flavour is going to be lower due to a reduced grain bill. Be sure to sparge evenly, covering the entire grain bed to wash those sugars and flavours through. It was then time for the boil, and I kept with a modern boil time of 30 minutes, which not only saves you time, but actually boils off less flavour, once again more important for a recipe of this type than ever. You can see on the screen to the right that we have a hop schedule here with Mosaic and Citra for just the late stages, namely at 10 minutes remaining and a hop stand. Let's now look at what this hop combination has to offer. As you can see from this chart from within hop control, Mosaic shown here in orange is highest in its berry content, but also pushes tropical fruit, citrus resin, pine, as well as grassy qualities, whereas Citra shown here in green has a huge amount of citrus, as well as tropical fruit and floral and berry elements. When combined, they create an intense, juicy and vibrant citrus tropical punch-like effect. You can expect big bursts of grapefruit, lime, mango and passion fruit from Citra, with Mosaic adding in blueberry, pineapple, tangerine, peach and apricot. Mosaic also brings in its dank resinous qualities too, which balances out the bright fruit flavours brought by Citra. Together they give a candy-like fruitiness, especially within recipes like this one with a soft malt backbone. Furthermore, the interplay of Citra's tangy citrus and Mosaic's ripe berry flavours creates a complex layered taste. Mosaic and Citra offer one of the most loved hop combinations in craft brewing for its intense aroma and balanced complexity. After the boil, it was time to get ready for the whirlpool hop, so I cooled the wort down to 75 degrees Celsius, which is the equivalent of 176 degrees Fahrenheit, using my JD Brewing immersion chiller, which handled this in less than 1 minute with just the recirculation running and no stirring. In fact, it's vital to set your brewing system's heater to the desired temperature to avoid going lower in temperature than this. The chiller was then removed and I added the Mosaic and Citra whirlpool hops. Within this addition we add in a great deal of aroma, which actually then translates into further flavour. Once these hops were added and stirred in, they were left for 10 minutes before I then started the next step. I then continued the cooling process using a counterflow chiller, which starts with transferring back into the brewing system for a few minutes, and then you can start cooling and transfer into your fermenter. This is done this way to allow the smooth transfer of correctly cooled wort. I then started transfer into my fermentation vessel whilst it was being cooled. When it comes to yeast choice for this recipe, I suggest using a yeast that offers some extra fruity flavours. Good examples here would be Verdant IPA or Pomona from Lallemand, or a London Fog type yeast from companies like White Labs will also work very well. However, my yeast of choice here is Safbrew DA16 due to its tutti frutti like flavours and aromas, and also because it contains the extra ingredient that is needed at this stage, which is the enzyme glucoamylase, which should be easy to obtain from any good homebrew store. So if you decide to use a different yeast to the DA16, then you will need to obtain this separately. Whichever way you go, this enzyme will break down the complex sugars created in the mash into a more simple, easily fermented ones, allowing for a true dry beer that will finish at terminal gravity, which is 1000 Sg. This removes all excess sugar, helping to reduce the calories further. The very next step is concerning the dry hop additions, which are now shown on screen. Add your dry hops when you are between 5 to 10 gravity points away from your predicted final gravity. I have tried all methods of dry hopping, but frankly nothing so far has had as good results, and there is no need to buy a book either. The very most important thing here is to keep things clean and sanitary, so here is a guide to doing that in a way that has never failed me so far in hundreds of brews. In this example I'm going to use a hop sock, but the procedure is similar with other container types. This starts with boiling the bag. I strongly recommend doing this no matter if the bag has been previously used and cleaned, or if it's a brand new one straight out of the packaging. I then add this bag into a clean container and add sanitizer as a further safeguard. This will be the same container that I used to load the hops into. After this point I then wash and sanitize my hands, and this is repeated if I need to touch the bag after touching anything that is not clean and sanitary. These are very important steps to avoid contamination, which is all too common when it comes to homebrewers making IPAs because of this step. I then carefully add the dry hops with the bag lining the container, being sure that nothing touches the bag except for the hops. Once you have loaded all of your hops into the bag, then be sure to tie a nice strong knot to keep all of the hops contained. This loosely fitting hop bag, so there is room to expand, can now be added into your fermenter. In terms of contact time, 3 days is usually going to be plenty, but 5 days is fine too. I would avoid times more than a week to avoid grassy off flavours though. Let's now take a look at the finished beer, starting with the pour, and I will then go through my tasting notes. You can see that the pour is very light in colour, but once in the glass the end beer is a light gold. I have not used any fining agents here at all, but if you are not keen on this look, then simply use gelatin or fining agents, and this will transform the end beer into something crystal clear looking, if that matters to you. But in my past experience, this beer will clear up fairly fast anyway. This beer has been under 12 psi of pressure, which is 0.83 bars, and I'm using this pressure for serving too. The example you see here is at around the 3 wick point from kegging, and is conditioned flavour wise very nicely in this time, and like many IPA styles, this one I believe is perfectly good to be tasted early and fresh. Let's now go through my tasting notes, starting with aroma. Aroma. There's a big aroma here that comprises of citrus and tropical fruit. Flavour. Very easy entry into a tropical fruit box that has moderate candy-like fruitiness to it, along with some dank resinous qualities. The flavours found here are mostly led by grapefruit and pineapple, along with mango, lime and blueberry. Further into the background there is soft malt backbone along with passion fruit, tangerine, peach and apricot. The finish has an easy bite to it, and despite finishing very dry, the candy-like fruit flavours compensate for this and provide good balance. Here are some further notes from me. In blind tasting it was difficult for people to put their finger on where the ABV was with this beer. The average answer that came back was usually between 4.5 and 5.5% ABV, which is just one of the key attributes that I wanted this beer to have, despite in reality it being just 3.4%. I also wanted it to be refreshing and fruity, which was agreed on by all tasters. My final impression here is that this is a low ABV, low calorie and low carb IPA beer that is very refreshing and fruity flavourable to trick the drinker into believing that it is actually a regular IPA beer. So there you have it. Do let myself and the community know what you think of this video, and then later on, once you've brewed this recipe, your own tasting notes. It is always very much appreciated to see your feedback. I do hope that you found this video useful, informative and interesting. If so, why not consider liking and subscribing? For further support you can join the channel's Facebook group, and if you would like to support the channel then check out the channel's merchandise store, as all profits go back into the channel. Until next time, happy brewing!